The mind control parasite picked a human host. It deeply regrets that decision Vorthak drifted through the cold darkness of space like a shadow with purpose. For 3,000 years, the ancient parasite had moved from world to world, leaving behind empty planets filled with mindless shells. 17 different species had fallen to its touch. 17 civilizations had become nothing more than walking corpses, serving its will. The creature remembered each conquest with satisfaction. The proud Kalari warriors who had ruled half a galaxy became docile servants within hours. The brilliant Nexus scientists who could bend reality with their minds crumbled like paper when Vorthak entered their thoughts. Even the massive Gorvani, each one strong enough to crush mountains, had bowed their heads in submission. Every species was the same. Their minds were simple things, organized and predictable. Vorthak would slip inside, find the central control point, and take over. Like flipping a switch, the host would stop being themselves and start being an extension of Vorthak's will. It was efficient. It was perfect. It never took more than 30 minutes. Now Vorthak approached a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. The inhabitants called it Earth, though they would not be calling it anything for much longer. Vorthak had been watching them for weeks, studying their simple electromagnetic patterns from the edge of their solar system. Humans, they called themselves. How boring. They were clearly primitive, still fighting wars with crude chemical weapons and burning fossil fuels for energy. Their technology was thousands of years behind the civilizations Vorthak had already conquered. This would be the easiest takeover yet. The parasite descended through Earth's atmosphere, like an invisible mist. It passed over vast cities filled with millions of potential hosts, but Vorthak was patient. The perfect target would present itself soon enough. Someone isolated, tired, mentally weak. Someone whose disappearance would not be immediately noticed. Souls sprawled below like a circuit board of lights. Vorthak sensed the electromagnetic activity of 6 million human minds going about their simple daily routines. Work, sleep, eat, reproduce. So predictable. So easy to control. The parasite found what it was looking for in a large building filled with the sick and injured. A hospital, the humans called it. These places were perfect hunting grounds. People came here when they were already weak and vulnerable. Their defenses were already down. Vorthak slipped through the walls like smoke and began examining potential hosts. Too old, too young, too healthy, too many people around. Then it found him. Kim Do-yun stood in a brightly lit room, his hands covered in blood as he worked on a patient. The human male was 28 years old, tired beyond measure, and completely focused on his task. Perfect. Vorthak studied its chosen target carefully. Do-hyun had been working for 36 straight hours, surviving on nothing but coffee and determination. His mind showed signs of exhaustion and stress. Even better, he was alone with an unconscious patient. No witnesses. The doctor's hands moved with practiced skill as he stitched a deep wound. His face was pale with fatigue, but his concentration never wavered. Vorthak could sense the human's thoughts, scattered and chaotic from lack of sleep. This would be like taking control of a child. The parasite waited for the perfect moment. When Do-hyun reached for a new surgical instrument, his hand brushed against the edge of a broken metal tray. A small cut opened on his palm, barely deep, enough to draw blood. That was all Vorthak needed. The parasite flowed through the microscopic wound like liquid shadow. It felt the warm pulse of human blood, the steady rhythm of a beating heart. This was always the moment Vorthak enjoyed most, the first taste of a new species. But something was wrong. Instead of the simple, organized mind structure Vorthak expected, it found itself in what could only be described as chaos. Human consciousness was not like other species at all. Where the Kalari had single-focused minds and the Nexus had perfectly logical thought patterns, Do-hyun's mind was a storm of competing ideas, memories, emotions, and instincts all happening at once. Vorthak tried to locate the central control point, the place where all other species kept their sense of self. It did not exist. Instead, there were dozens of different voices in Do-hyun's head, all talking at the same time. One part worried about the patient on the table, another part was hungry and wanted food. A third part was thinking about a conversation from yesterday. A fourth part was humming a song. This was not how minds were supposed to work. Vorthak pushed harder, trying to force its way into the driver's seat of consciousness. In every other species, this was where they would feel the parasite's presence and panic, making them even easier to control. Fear was an excellent tool for breaking down mental defenses. Do-hyun paused in his stitching and looked at his bleeding hand with mild annoyance. "Great," he muttered to himself. "That's all I needed today." The human cleaned the small wound with antiseptic and continued working. He showed no signs of fear, panic, or even awareness that anything unusual had happened. Vorthak was baffled. Every other species had immediately sensed its presence and tried to fight back. This human acted like nothing had changed. The parasite gathered its full strength and launched a direct assault on what it thought was the center of Do-hyun's consciousness. This attack had never failed before. It was designed to overwhelm and dominate in seconds. Do-hyun stopped working and frowned. He looked around the empty room as if searching for something. "Hello?" he called out softly. "Is someone there?" Vorthak froze. This was impossible. The human was talking to it directly. "Look, I don't know what's going on," Do-hyun continued while returning to his patient. "But I can feel something weird happening in my head. If you're some kind of psychic alien thing trying to take over my mind, could you maybe wait until I finish saving this guy's life? I've got about 20 more minutes of surgery here." For the first time in 3,000 years, Vorthak felt something it had never experienced before. Confusion. The parasite had encountered resistance before. Fear, anger, desperation, all the usual emotions of a species facing extinction. But it had never met a host who acknowledged its presence and asked it to wait its turn. What kind of creature was this human? The mind control parasite. Picked a human host. It deeply regrets that decision. Vorthak spent the next 20 minutes in a state of complete bewilderment. The parasite watched through Do-hyun's eyes as the human finished the surgery with steady hands and perfect focus. Not once did the doctor show any sign of the mental battle that should have been raging inside his skull. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. When the Kalari warriors had been infected, they had screamed and thrashed as Vorthak tore through their minds. The Nexus scientists had tried to use their reality-bending powers to fight back before falling into unconsciousness. The Gorvani had roared challenges that shook mountains before becoming silent servants. But this human just kept working. Do-hyun finished the last stitch and stepped back to examine his work. The patient on the table breathed steadily, completely, unaware that his doctor was currently hosting the most dangerous parasite in the galaxy. "There we go," Do-hyun said to the unconscious man. "You're going to be fine. Try not to get hit by any more trucks." The doctor cleaned his instruments and made notes on a chart. His movements were calm and professional. The only sign that anything unusual was happening came when he occasionally tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Vorthak tried again. The parasite had been studying human anatomy during the surgery, learning how this species' neural pathways worked. Now it launched a more focused attack, targeting what appeared to be the centers for motor control and speech. Do-hyun paused while writing and looked down at his hands with mild curiosity. "Okay, that tickled," he said aloud. "Are you the thing that's been poking around in my brain?" The parasite recoiled in shock. Direct communication was impossible. Hosts were not supposed to maintain consciousness during the invasion process. Do-hyun waited a few seconds, then nodded as if he had received an answer. Right. So you're some kind of alien mind control parasite. That's new. The doctor continued writing his notes without missing a beat. I've got to ask, is this your first time trying to take over a human? Because you're really bad at this. Vorthak felt something it had never experienced in 3,000 years of conquest. Embarrassment. The parasite gathered every bit of its power and launched the most devastating mental attack in its arsenal. This was the technique that had broken the will of entire civilizations. The psychic assault hit Do-hyun's consciousness like a tsunami of pure dominating force. Do-hyun winced and rubbed his forehead. Ow. Could you not do that while I'm writing? I've got terrible handwriting already. This was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Vorthak's attack should have instantly reduced any conscious being to a drooling puppet. Instead, the human was complaining about his penmanship. The door to the surgical room opened and a young woman in scrubs entered. She had short black hair and tired eyes that suggested she had been working long hours as well. Her name tag read Park Somin. Do-hyun, how did the surgery go? Somin asked, looking at the patient. Clean and simple. He'll be back on his feet in a few weeks. Do-hyun turned to face her, and Vorthak noticed something odd. For just a moment, the human's eyes flickered with an otherworldly gleam before returning to normal. Somin studied Do-hyun's face with the sharp attention of someone who had worked with him for years. Are you feeling okay? You look strange. Just tired. 36 hours is a long shift, even for me. You keep talking to yourself. I heard you having a conversation in here, but there's no one else around. Somin crossed her arms and gave him a concerned look. Maybe you should go home and get some sleep. Do-hyun glanced around the empty room as if suddenly remembering where he was. Right. Sorry. I was just thinking out loud. Vorthak tried to seize the moment of distraction. The parasite pushed against Do-hyun's consciousness, trying to take control of his vocal cords and speak through his mouth. This was basic possession technique, something even young parasites could master. I'm fine, Somin. Really, Do-hyun said, but his voice carried a slight edge that had not been there before. Somin's eyes narrowed. She had definitely noticed the change in tone. Seriously, when was the last time you slept? You're acting weird. Do-hyun opened his mouth to respond, but instead of words, he started having an argument with himself. Look, I appreciate that you want to take over, he muttered, but I'm trying to have a normal conversation here. Who are you talking to? Somin demanded. The alien parasite that's trying to control my brain, Do-hyun said matter-of-factly. Somin stared at him. What? Sorry, that sounded crazy, didn't it? Do-hyun rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. I meant the voice in my head that's definitely just exhaustion and not an actual alien mind control parasite. Vorthak was horrified. The human had just told another person about the invasion. This was the opposite of how possession was supposed to work. Hosts were meant to act normal until the entire species could be infected simultaneously. Do-hyun, you're starting to worry me, Somin said. Maybe I should call Dr. Lee. No, I'm okay. Just need coffee. Do-hyun started walking toward the door, but his movement was slightly unsteady, as if two different minds were trying to control his legs at the same time. Down the hallway, another doctor noticed Do-hyun's odd behavior. Lee Jin-woo was older than the others, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been watching Do-hyun work for the past few hours and had seen the subtle changes in his colleagues' behavior. Do-hyun looks terrible, Jin-woo said to Somin as they watched him walk away. More terrible than usual, I mean. He says he's hearing voices, Somin whispered, and he keeps having conversations with someone who isn't there. Jin-woo frowned. Auditory hallucinations from sleep deprivation. We should send him home. Meanwhile, Vorthak was discovering just how different human minds were from every other species it had encountered. Instead of a single stream of consciousness, Do-hyun's thoughts moved in dozens of directions at once. Part of him was thinking about his next patient. Another part was worried about what So-min thought of his behavior. A third part was wondering if he should eat something. And somehow, another part was having a running commentary about the alien parasite trying to take over his brain. It was like trying to drive a vehicle with 50 different steering wheels, all being turned by different people who were not talking to each other. Vorthak attempted a different approach. Instead of trying to dominate the entire mind at once, it focused on taking control of just one small part. Motor function seemed like a good place to start. Do-hyun was pouring coffee when his hand suddenly jerked, spilling hot liquid across the counter. "Really?" he said aloud. "You're going to mess with my coffee? That's just mean." A passing nurse looked at him strangely and hurried away. Do-hyun cleaned up the spill and poured himself a fresh cup. "Look, whatever your name is, I get that you want to take over my body and probably destroy humanity or something. But I've got 12 more patients to see tonight, and I really need this caffeine. Can we work out some kind of schedule?" For the second time in its ancient existence, Vorthak experienced something completely foreign. The parasite was starting to doubt itself. The mind control parasite picked a human host. It deeply regrets that decision. 3 days had passed since Vorthak invaded Do-hyun's mind, and the parasite was beginning to understand a horrible truth. Human consciousness was not like anything else in the galaxy. Where other species had organized, predictable thought patterns, humans seemed to think in pure chaos. Do-hyun's mind was like a busy marketplace where dozens of different voices were all talking at once. One part of his brain was focused on medical procedures. Another part was remembering a conversation from childhood. A third part was wondering what to have for lunch. And somehow, a fourth part was maintaining a running conversation with an ancient galactic parasite. The human had adapted to Vorthak's presence with disturbing ease. He treated the invasion like having an annoying roommate who would not leave. "Good morning," Do-hyun said cheerfully as he walked into the hospital. He was speaking quietly, but other people could still hear him. "Did you sleep well? Oh, wait, you probably don't sleep. Do you even have dreams? What's it like being a formless consciousness of pure evil?" A security guard looked at him strangely as he passed. Do-hyun waved and continued walking. Vorthak had spent the previous night trying to understand human neural structure. What it found made no sense. Humans had evolved from creatures that lived in groups, so their minds were designed for constant social interaction. Even when alone, they continued talking to themselves, arguing with themselves, and maintaining multiple streams of thought simultaneously. It was like trying to control a computer that was running 50 different programs at the same time, all competing for resources. "You know what your problem is?" Do-hyun said as he put on his white coat. "You're thinking too much like a conqueror and not enough like a collaborator. Has anyone ever tried working with you instead of against you?" The question caught Vorthak off guard. In 3,000 years, no one had ever suggested cooperation. The parasite existed to dominate and control. That was its nature, its purpose, its entire reason for being. "I can feel you thinking about that," Do-hyun continued. "Look, I've got patients to see, but maybe we can figure something out. You obviously know things about medicine that I don't. That surgery yesterday went better than it should have, and I'm pretty sure that was your influence." This was true. Vorthak had been trying to take control of Do-hyun's hands during the operation, but instead of fighting the invasion, the human had somehow turned it into assistance. The parasite's vast knowledge of alien biology had helped the doctor make better decisions about human anatomy. It had been an accident, but the results were undeniable. Do-hyun entered his first patient's room. The man had been in a car accident and had internal injuries that would normally require major surgery. As Do-hyun examined him, Vorthak found itself automatically analyzing the damage with knowledge gained from 17 different species. "See, you're doing it again," Do-hyun murmured as he studied the patient's charts. "You know exactly what's wrong with him and how to fix it. Why don't we work together instead of fighting each other?" The parasite was horrified to realize it was actually... Considering the suggestion, Park So-min entered the room and gave Do-hyun a concerned look. "Are you still talking to yourself?" "It's more like talking to someone else who happens to be inside my head," Do-hyun replied. "Don't worry, I'm not going crazy." "Well, probably not." "That's not reassuring," So-min said. "Maybe you should see Dr. Kim about getting some psychiatric evaluation." "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Watch this." Do-hyun turned back to the patient and began explaining a treatment plan that should have been impossible for someone with his level of experience. He described surgical techniques that had not been invented yet and medication combinations that no human doctor had ever tried. So-min stared at him in amazement. "Where did you learn all that?" "My new roommate is very knowledgeable about medicine," Do-hyun said with a straight face. Later that evening, Do-hyun sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, eating terrible coffee and a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. The place was nearly empty except for a few night shift workers. "So tell me about yourself," he said quietly. "What's your name? Where do you come from? Do you have hobbies?" Vorthak had never been asked personal questions before. The concept was alien to its experience. Hosts were not supposed to care about their invaders' backgrounds. "Vorthak is a good name," Do-hyun said after a pause. "Very dramatic. I bet you chose it yourself, didn't you? It sounds like something an ancient cosmic horror would pick." The parasite was disturbed to realize that yes, it had chosen the name specifically for its intimidating sound. "And you've been doing this for 3,000 years? That must get boring after a while. Same routine, different planet. Find host, take over mind, conquer species, move on. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to just hang out somewhere for a while?" Vorthak had never wondered about anything. It simply existed and consumed. But now, trapped in this chaotic human mind, it was beginning to experience something that might have been curiosity. "You know what I think?" Do-hyun continued. "I think you're lonely. You spend all this time taking over other people's minds, but you never actually connect with anyone. You turn them into puppets, but puppets can't have real conversations. The my." Observation hit Vorthak like a physical blow. In 3,000 years of conquest, it had never had a genuine interaction with another consciousness. Every host had either fought uselessly against the invasion or surrendered completely. No one had ever simply talked to the parasite as if it were a person. "Look, I have a proposal," Do-hyun said, finishing his sandwich. "You can stay in my head. I'm obviously not strong enough to kick you out, and honestly, your medical knowledge is incredible. But instead of trying to control me, why don't you just be a consultant? I'll listen to your advice and you can experience what it's like to help people instead of conquering them." Vorthak considered this. The logical response was to reject the offer and continue trying to dominate the human's will. But logic seemed to work differently in this species. Humans did not make decisions based purely on efficiency or power. They factored in emotions, relationships, and abstract concepts like cooperation and fairness. "I can feel you thinking about it," Do-hyun said. "Come on, what do you have to lose? If you don't like it, you can always go back to trying to turn me into a mindless drone. But maybe, just maybe, you might enjoy having a friend for once." For the third time in its existence, Vorthak experienced a completely foreign emotion. Hope. The parasite realized with growing horror that it was actually starting to like this human. The mind control parasite picked a human host. It deeply regrets that decision. 2 weeks had passed since Do-hyun's offer of partnership, and Vorthak was beginning to understand why humans had survived as a species despite being individually weak. They were completely unpredictable. The parasite had reluctantly agreed to try cooperation, mainly because its attempts at domination had been so spectacularly unsuccessful. But what started as a temporary arrangement was becoming something the ancient being had never experienced before. Do-hyun had kept his word. Instead of fighting the parasite's presence, he listened to its medical advice and used Vorthak's vast knowledge to help his patients. In return, Vorthak got to experience human emotions and sensations for the first time in its existence. It was disturbing how much the parasite was enjoying itself. Patient in room 12 has symptoms that don't match his diagnosis, Do-hyun murmured as he walked down the hospital corridor. What do you think? Vorthak examined the man's condition through Do-hyun's senses. The human doctors had diagnosed food poisoning, but the parasite could detect something far more serious. You're right, it's not food poisoning, Do-hyun said after receiving Vorthak's analysis. Internal bleeding from a small rupture. He'll need surgery within the hour or he'll die. Lee Jin-woo overheard the conversation and frowned. Do-hyun, who are you talking to? And how do you know it's internal bleeding? The tests don't show anything. Run a deeper scan. Trust me on this one. Jin-woo looked skeptical but ordered the additional tests. 20 minutes later, he returned with a shocked expression. You were right. How did you know? Do-hyun shrugged. Lucky guess. But Somin was paying closer attention. She had been watching Do-hyun for 2 weeks, and his behavior was becoming more unusual every day. He diagnosed conditions that should have been impossible to detect. He performed surgical procedures with techniques that were not in any medical textbook, and he continued having one-sided conversations with someone no one else could see. Do-hyun, can I talk to you privately? Somin asked after they had finished treating the patient. They walked to an empty break room and Somin closed the door. I've been thinking about what you said before, about the alien parasite. I was joking about that, Do-hyun said quickly. Obviously, there's no actual alien in my head. Were you joking? Because your medical knowledge has improved dramatically in the past 2 weeks. You're making diagnoses that senior doctors miss. You're using surgical techniques I've never seen before. Either you've been hiding your abilities for 3 years, or something has changed. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. Vorthak could feel the human's internal debate about how much truth to reveal. Would you believe me if I told you the truth? Do-hyun asked finally. Try me. There really is something in my head. I don't know if it's an alien, a parasite, or just a very elaborate hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. But whatever it is, it knows things about medicine that I could never learn on my own. Somin studied his face carefully. Are you in danger? Is this thing hurting you? No, it's actually helping. We have an arrangement. An arrangement with a voice in your head. I know how it sounds, but look at the results. In 2 weeks, we haven't lost a single patient. Not one. Do you know what our success rate was like before this started? Somin had to admit that Do-hyun's recent performance had been remarkable. But the rational part of her mind refused to accept the explanation. Meanwhile, Vorthak was experiencing something completely new. The parasite was actually concerned about what the human female thought of their arrangement. This made no sense. The opinions of lesser beings had never mattered before, but Somin was important to Do-hyun, which somehow made her important to Vorthak as well. After work, Do-hyun went home to his small apartment. It was a simple place with basic furniture and medical journals scattered everywhere. He lived alone, which had made it easier to have conversations with his unwelcome guest without attracting attention. So what did you think of Somin? Do-hyun asked as he heated up leftover noodles for dinner. Vorthak was surprised to realize it had been paying attention to the nurse's emotional reactions during their conversation. The parasite had found her concern for Do-hyun's well-being to be oddly touching. You like her, don't you? Do-hyun continued. I can feel it when you focus on her. It's different from how you pay attention to other people. The accusation made Vorthak uncomfortable. The parasite did not form attachments to individuals. It consumed civilizations, not friendships. There's nothing wrong with caring about people, Do-hyun said gently. It doesn't make you weak. If anything, it makes you stronger. This was exactly the opposite of everything Vorthak had believed for 3,000 years. Emotional attachments were weaknesses to be exploited, not strengths to be cultivated. But the parasite was beginning to understand that human strength came from connections rather than domination. Do-hyun worked harder to save patients because he cared about their families. Somin was a better nurse because she worried about her colleagues. Even Jinwoo's skeptical nature came from a desire to protect others from medical errors. The doorbell rang, interrupting Vorthak's thoughts. Do-hyun opened it to find a young woman with long black hair and intelligent eyes. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving complex problems. Choi Hyeri, Do-hyun said with genuine pleasure. I wasn't expecting you. Tonight. Hyeri stepped inside and kissed him briefly. I finished my research project early and thought I'd surprise you. How was work? Vorthak realized this must be the girlfriend Do-hyun had mentioned in his thoughts. The parasite found itself studying her with interest. She was a scientist, someone who would analyze problems logically. Work was good. Really good, actually. I'm getting better at diagnosing difficult cases. Hyeri settled onto the couch and looked at him carefully. You seem different lately, more confident but also more distracted. Are you feeling okay? I'm fine. Better than fine. But even as he said it, Do-hyun's hand trembled slightly as he set down his bowl of noodles. Vorthak had been trying not to interfere with the human's motor functions, but maintaining complete separation was difficult. Your hand is shaking, Hyeri observed. Have you been drinking too much coffee again? Maybe a little. Hyeri moved closer and took his hand in hers, checking his pulse. Her touch was gentle but professional, and Vorthak was surprised to feel Do-hyun's heart rate increase in response. Your pulse is elevated, but it's steady, she said. Are you under more stress than usual? Do-hyun looked into her eyes and seemed to make a decision. Hyeri, what would you say if I told you I was sharing my consciousness with another being? She raised an eyebrow. I'd say you need to stop reading science fiction before bed. But hypothetically, if it were true, and if this other being was helping me save lives, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Hyeri considered the question seriously. Hypothetically, I'd want to know more about this other being's motivations. Is it helping because it genuinely cares about human welfare? Or does it have some other agenda? Do-hyun was quiet for a moment, and Vorthak realized the human was actually waiting for an answer. The parasite found itself genuinely uncertain. When it had first invaded Do-hyun's mind, the goal had been conquest. But now, after 2 weeks of saving lives and experiencing human emotions, Vorthak was no longer sure what it wanted. All it knew was that it had never been happier. The mind control parasite picked a human host. It deeply regrets that decision. 1 month after the initial invasion, Vorthak made a discovery that changed everything. The parasite was no longer trying to control Do-hyun. Instead, it was actively protecting him. The realization came during what should have been a routine emergency. A construction worker had been brought in with severe injuries from a building collapse, multiple broken ribs, internal bleeding, and possible spinal damage, the kind of case that required perfect coordination between surgeon and equipment. But as Do-hyun began the operation, one of the monitors malfunctioned. The machine that tracked the patient's vital signs went dark just as his blood pressure started dropping dangerously. Without thinking, Vorthak took direct control of Do-hyun's senses. The parasite could detect the patient's heartbeat, blood flow, and neural activity without any machines. It guided Do-hyun's hands to the exact location of the bleeding and helped him stop it before the man died. The surgery was a complete success, but afterward, Do-hyun sat in the break room, shaking. You saved his life, he whispered. When the monitors failed, you became my eyes and ears. You could have let him die and used my guilt to gain more control over my mind. Instead, you helped me save him." Vorthak had no answer. The parasite had acted on instinct, but that instinct had been to preserve life rather than exploit weakness. When had its fundamental nature changed so completely? "I think we're becoming something new," Do-hyun continued. "Not human, not parasite, but something in between. A partnership." The word partnership sent waves of both terror and excitement through Vorthak's consciousness. In 3,000 years of existence, it had never been an equal participant in anything. But their conversation was interrupted by an emergency alarm. Multiple casualties were arriving from a major accident, and all available medical staff were needed immediately. Do-hyun rushed to the emergency bay where chaos greeted him. A bus had collided with several cars during rush-hour traffic. Dozens of injured people were being brought in faster than the hospital could handle them. "We need to prioritize," Lee Jin-woo shouted over the noise. "Focus on the cases we can save." But Vorthak could see what the human doctors could not. Using knowledge from 17 different species, the parasite could detect injuries that would not show symptoms for hours. It could identify which patients would survive without immediate treatment and which ones would die without instant intervention. "Room 3 needs surgery now," Do-hyun called out, pointing to a patient who looked relatively stable. "Internal hemorrhaging will kill him in 20 minutes. "Room 7 first," Jin-woo argued. "That patient is unconscious. Room 7 will survive. Room 3 won't. Trust me." Jin-woo looked skeptical, but he had learned to respect Do-hyun's unusual diagnostic abilities. The younger doctor had not been wrong once in the past month. For the next 6 hours, Do-hyun worked with superhuman efficiency. He diagnosed conditions instantly, performed surgeries with impossible precision, and seemed to know exactly which patients needed immediate attention. Other doctors started following his lead, trusting his judgment even when it contradicted their training. By dawn, they had saved everyone. Not a single patient had died, despite injuries that should have been fatal, but the victory came with a price. As the adrenaline wore off, Do-hyun collapsed from exhaustion. Vorthak had been pushing the human body beyond its normal limits, and the strain was beginning to show. Somin found him sitting on the floor of the supply closet, his head in his hands. "Do-hyun, you need to rest. You've been working for 18 straight hours." "I'm fine," he said. But his voice was weak and his hands were trembling. "You're not fine. You're barely holding yourself together." Somin sat down beside him. "I don't understand what's happening to you, but I can see that it's taking a toll." Do-hyun looked at her with tired eyes. "What if I told you that everything I've accomplished in the past month wasn't really me? What if someone else was doing the heavy lifting? Then I'd say you're not giving yourself enough credit. Maybe you have help, but you're still the one making the decisions. You're still the one who cares enough to push yourself this hard." Vorthak was struck by the truth of her observation. The parasite provided knowledge and enhanced senses, but Do-hyun's compassion and determination were entirely human. The partnership worked because both beings brought something valuable to it. That evening, Do-hyun went home to find Hyeri waiting for him with dinner and a concerned expression. "We need to talk," she said, as he sat down at the table. "That sounds serious." "I've been doing research." Hyeri pulled out a laptop and opened several files. "For the past month, you've been performing medical procedures that shouldn't be possible. I ran statistical analyses on your patient outcomes, and the improvement is beyond anything that can be explained by training or experience." Do-hyun said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "I also found something else. There have been reports from around the world of similar phenomena. Doctors suddenly developing impossible abilities, scientists making breakthrough discoveries overnight, artists creating works of genius after years of mediocrity." Vorthak felt a chill of recognition. These were signs of parasite invasion. Others of its kind had come to Earth. But here's the strange part. Hyeri continued. In every case, the affected individuals are using their new abilities to help people. They're not seeking power or wealth. They're just trying to make the world better. What are you suggesting? I think humanity is under some kind of influence, but instead of being conquered, we're being improved. Whatever is happening to you and others like you, it's not malevolent. Do-Yun was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at her. What would you do if you discovered that the influence wasn't benevolent originally but changed its nature because of human influence? Hyeri considered this carefully. I'd say that sounds like evolution, adaptation, maybe even redemption. That night, as Do-Yun slept, Vorthak made contact with the other parasites that had come to Earth. What it found horrified it. They were not adapting like Vorthak had. They were following the original plan, taking control of their hosts and preparing for a coordinated invasion. But they were struggling with the same problems Vorthak had faced. Human consciousness was too chaotic and unpredictable for traditional domination techniques. Some of the parasites were becoming frustrated and violent, damaging their hosts' minds in their attempts to gain control. Others were simply failing to establish any meaningful connection at all. But a few, like Vorthak, were beginning to discover the possibility of cooperation. The ancient parasite realized it faced a choice. It could join its brethren in their conquest, attempt, or it could warn humanity about the invasion. For Vorthak, there was no real choice at all. The parasite had found something worth protecting. The mind control parasite picked a human host. It deeply regrets that decision. The invasion began at exactly midnight on a Tuesday. Across the globe, parasites that had been hiding in human hosts for weeks suddenly attempted coordinated mass possession. In hospitals, laboratories, and government buildings, infected individuals stopped mid-conversation as alien minds tried to seize complete control, but the invasion did not go according to plan. In Tokyo, a parasite-enhanced surgeon named Dr. Tanaka found himself in a fierce mental battle with his unwilling passenger. Instead of surrendering, he started lecturing the invader about the importance of patient consent while continuing to perform emergency surgery. In London, a scientist named Professor Williams began arguing with her parasite about research ethics in the middle of an important presentation. The alien being had expected easy domination, but instead found itself trapped in a debate about the moral implications of unauthorized experimentation. In New York, a parasite tried to take control of a police officer named Detective Rodriguez, only to discover that humans who spent their lives protecting others had remarkably strong mental defenses against unwanted intrusion. The pattern was the same everywhere. Humans were not responding to the invasion the way conquered species were supposed to respond. Do-Yun felt the moment when his fellow parasites made their move. Vorthak's consciousness suddenly became tense and alert, like a soldier hearing distant gunfire. "They're starting the final phase, aren't they?" Do-Yun asked as he walked through the hospital corridors. Vorthak confirmed his suspicion. The other parasites were attempting to complete their conquest, but they were struggling against human unpredictability just as Vorthak had struggled. "What do we do?" The question caught Vorthak off guard. The parasite realized that Do-Yun was asking for its opinion as an equal partner, not waiting for orders from a superior being. "We warn people," Do-Yun continued without waiting for an answer. "If there are others like you who are trying to take over human hosts, we need to teach people how to resist." This was the moment Vorthak had been dreading. The parasite would have to choose between its own species and the humans it had come to care about. But when the moment came, there was no hesitation. Do-Yun found Somin and Jinwoo in the break room and sat down with them. "I need to tell you both something, and I need you to listen carefully without thinking I'm crazy." "More crazy than you already seem?" Jinwoo asked with a tired smile. "Much more crazy." Do-Yun took a deep breath. "The voice in my head is real. It's an alien parasite that came to Earth to conquer humanity. But instead of taking over my mind, we became partners. Somin and Jinwoo exchanged worried glances. And right now, there are others like it trying to possess people all over the world. The invasion is happening tonight. Do-hyun, Somin said gently. Maybe you should talk to someone about this, a psychiatrist or... Her words were cut off by screaming from the emergency ward. All three doctors ran toward the sound and found chaos. A patient who had been unconscious for 3 days was now standing upright with his eyes rolled back, speaking in a language that hurt to listen to. 2 nurses were backing away from him, in terror, as he advanced with movements that looked wrong, as if someone else was learning how to use his body. That's one of them, Do-hyun said quietly. The parasite in that patient is trying to take complete control, but it's fighting against the human consciousness. Jinwoo stared at the possessed patient. This is really happening? I'm afraid so. The possessed patient turned toward them, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that no human throat should have been able to produce. Vorthak, the thing, said. You have betrayed your own kind. Why do you protect these inferior beings? Do-hyun stepped forward, and when he replied, Vorthak spoke through his voice with the same otherworldly tones. Because they are not inferior. They are different. And that difference makes them stronger than any species we have conquered. Impossible. Humans are weak, divided, chaotic. Yes, they are chaotic. That chaos makes them impossible to control completely, but it also makes them creative, adaptable, and capable of forming connections that transcend individual survival. The possessed patient tilted his head, confused. Connections? Do-hyun gestured to Somin and Jinwoo, who despite their terror had not run away. These humans are afraid, but they stay because they care about others. They risk their own safety to help. People they have never met. This is not weakness. This is strength we never understood. Over the following hours, more cases appeared throughout the city. People who had been acting strangely for weeks were now in open conflict with alien presences in their minds. But instead of succumbing to possession, many of them were fighting, back with typically human stubbornness. Do-hyun worked with hospital security and local authorities to identify possessed individuals and help them resist their invaders. Using Vorthak's knowledge of parasite psychology, he taught people how to compartmentalize their thoughts and maintain mental barriers. The key is not to fight them directly, he explained to a room full of doctors and nurses. That's what they expect. Instead, keep talking to them, ask questions, be curious about their experiences. Most of these parasites have never had anyone show interest in them as individuals rather than as threats. It sounded insane, but it worked. Around the world, humans were doing the impossible. Instead of being conquered, they were converting their would-be conquerors. Parasites that had expected easy domination found themselves in philosophical debates, ethical discussions, and genuine conversations about the meaning of existence. Some parasites fled their hosts in confusion, unable to cope with the mental chaos of human consciousness. Others, like Vorthak, began to discover the possibility of partnership. By dawn, the invasion had failed completely, but something unexpected had taken its place. Humans who had successfully resisted possession found themselves with enhanced abilities, provided by parasites who had chosen cooperation over conquest. Doctors could diagnose diseases with impossible accuracy. Scientists made breakthrough discoveries. Artists created works of stunning beauty. Humanity had not been conquered. Instead, it had gained partners. 3 months later, Do-hyun stood before an international conference of medical professionals explaining techniques that combined human intuition with alien knowledge. Beside him, Hyeri presented research on symbiotic consciousness that was revolutionizing understanding of both human and non-human intelligence. In the audience, Somin listened with fascination as her friend described medical procedures that would have been fantasy just months earlier. She had adapted to the new reality with typical human pragmatism. If alien parasites wanted to help people get better, she would learn to work with them. That evening, Do-hyun sat in his apartment having dinner with Hyeri and reviewing patient files. The work never stopped, but it was more rewarding than ever. Any regrets? He asked aloud. Vorthak considered the question. The parasite had given up its chance to conquer a galaxy, but in return had gained something far more valuable. It had friends, purpose, and for the first time in 3,000 years, genuine happiness. None at all, Do-hyun said, speaking for both of them. Across the city, in laboratories and hospitals and schools, other humans were having similar conversations with their alien partners. Humanity had faced extinction and instead gained allies. The galaxy would never be the same, and Vorthak, the ancient parasite who had once conquered 17 species, had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the best way to gain everything is to stop trying to take it by force.